Hi, I'm Dusty, and welcome back to my lab. Today, I want to talk a little bit about consciousness and panpsychism. Why do I want to talk about panpsychism? Well, really, I've just been hearing different people mention the word, and generally, not really give a great explanation of what it means, at least in my opinion. And granted, this is only my own perception and understanding of it, but I do want to talk a little bit more about consciousness, and also just kind of tie this video a little bit back into my Destiny video, and kind of take the basic thought experiment that I portrayed there in that video and kind of elaborate a little bit upon it, and then tie it into consciousness and panpsychism in general. So, what is panpsychism? Let's just take the Wikipedia definition. In the philosophy of mind, panpsychism is the view that the mind or a mind-like aspect is a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of reality. It is also described as a theory that, quote-unquote, the mind is a fundamental feature of the world which exists throughout the universe. Recent interest in the hard problem of consciousness and developments in the field of neuroscience, psychology, and quantum physics have revived interest in panpsychism in the 21st century. Okay, so there's a little bit of an idea of it. Panpsychism is kind of tied inexorably to the concept of dualism. The idea that mind is somehow separate from materialism, that material things are one aspect of reality and then mind is another aspect of reality. And the mentioned hard problem of consciousness kind of lends itself to that belief, because there's almost no material way of understanding the world that can account for what's called qualia. So like just the sensations of being conscious and having conscious awareness and experience. I say almost none. I mean, I'm sure that there are different, materialistic ways of trying to understand it, but as far as like what the actual redness is, I mean, there's no material that is the actual qualia or experience of redness. And I want to kind of like talk a little bit about that. And, maybe not so much redness, but just consciousness in general. Like what is it? What is experience? What is sensation, qualia, these things in general? And like, what is a better way perhaps to like frame it instead of just thinking that, it's separate from material? Okay. So, in my previous video, I did a quick little, demonstration or drawing, whatever you want to call it, of a creator, and in this scenario, a video game creator, creating a video game, and then the general concept was tied back to Destiny, in the sense that a video game creator can understand the entire linear timeline of events within a game, or like what the progression needs to be, or all the aspects of the game, all of the different physical interactions, all the different rules, all the different characters, and all the different prompts and quotes and everything. But the kicker for that specific thought experiment is just the idea that no matter how much knowledge you have of the game, the only way to understand what it's like to actually play it is to take kind of like to lower your perspective down to the role of the character that you created itself. And in that situation though, you fundamentally give up that higher perspective, that like it's a necessity. You can't occupy both at the same time, or else you break the fundamental rules of the game in some sense. And that's a little bit mucky, a little bit muddy. I'm hopefully by the end of this you'll understand a little bit better what I mean. Okay, so in that scenario, what's going on? So we have, let's imagine, the video game creator. This is kind of like what I drew. He's looking at a timeline, and then there's a character, who also has a point of view, right? And this aspect of a point of view is going to be important. It's actually kind of like the common sense way that I've always described like what exactly is happening in my mind, and just understanding consciousness and materialism in general. We're going to start talking about points, and then points of view will be more important. But so let's think about the point of view of this guy. Okay, so he has the point of view of understanding all of this, and like you could even think that, all right, maybe the experience is like, you could literally imagine a video game creator, all right, so a human being, gets up, goes to work, puts on his clothes, blah, 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 like the new Matrix movie, or it could be in another, parallel reality where the laws of physics are totally different and whatever, but the big crux and the important bit about this is like the level of perception, right? So like, he has a perception that allows him to see all of this, whereas this person has a perception that only allows him to see what's directly in front of him, okay? Now, something that's interesting about this is that I keep saying that this entity has complete knowledge of this timeline. I don't think that's a little bit of a misnomer, okay? And I'm going to explain why. So, what exactly is it for us to know or be aware of something? So, we're not even thinking about consciousness, right? So we're motivated to believe that no matter what is going on with philosophy of mind or whatever, that there's some type of material representation or material stuff going on, like a reconfiguration of the stuff inside of my brain or this character's brain or this guy's brain that actually like holds and like is adjusted based on thought, interaction with the outside world, whatever. And there's this concept that humans they make models. So we're model makers. So in some sense, if you really think about it, we're not really in direct contact with the outside world. But we get sensory input, via photons and touch and heat and different sensory interactions. But everything is kind of our brain is producing a narrative or like a cohesive series of events that are kind of like a post-process on that raw data that comes in. So just thinking about it that way, you start to think that, and you start to understand that what we're interacting with more than likely is pales in comparison as far as complexity and the full aspect and nature of what we're interacting with. Our perception is just one important aspect of it for our survival, really. So, what is it for me to be aware of something? Well, like I just said, it's a reconfiguration of the material in my brain. And for me to, lose an arm or lose an eye or whatever, that fundamentally influences the way that my brain will work and then the way that my consciousness will be produced. So here's what I'm trying to move in the direction of. For this character, for this creator to really understand this, okay, like in a real way, and not just in a perception way, like in the way that we as humans understand basically everything, but for him to actually know this all completely. What is something that I can completely know? And this might be debatable, but in some sense, like I can know, in some sense at least, I'm the author of, the creator of my own thoughts and not perception, but if I choose to configure my thoughts or imagine a scenario in a specific way, in some sense that's an ideal demonstration of it. Okay, like it's not a representation of anything that's come from outside of my brain, because I'm using my brain to produce it, of its own volition, right? So we can argue that, okay, well, I'm imagining the perfect turtle, but there is no perfect turtle, so it's it doesn't really exist in any meaningful way. We can argue about that if you want, but that's not really my point. My point is just that unless he basically has this in his mind, okay, unless the entire timeline is completely encapsulated within his own intellect and his own material, machinery, then this is always separate from the entity, that even if it created it, okay? Like imagine the video game creator scenario again. How many video game creators do you think that there are that don't understand basic machine code? There's actually probably quite a lot, and I'm not saying the people who are doing the hard coding necessarily. I'm not trying to take a dig at anyone. I'm just saying that all the graphic designers, all the different types of minds and people that have to go into making a video game, not everyone has complete understanding of all of the tools and mechanisms that go into actually making it happen, right? So it's a situation where we can make things that we don't fully understand, okay, and we can be in interaction with things that we don't fully perceive, okay. The only way to fully perceive it is for it to be of you, is for it to be of like a cohesive aspect of consciousness. And so now we're going to talk a little bit more about the consciousness aspect and how this all ties into that. So what exactly is happening here? So we could say that, all right, before I drew this line, that this guy, here's his head and he's aware of all this, from the third person perspective, right? Now, we could say the same thing about this character in this game. You know, he's aware of whatever. He has these certain attributes. He has to move through the game and you know, change his attributes and increase his strength or whatever. And that actually makes a physical change. You know, it's virtual, but a physical change to what this entity is, right? Now, I said earlier in the video that our consciousness is a you know, a post process on a collection of sensory input, right? Something like that. Now, here's the point of view aspect. So like, how is it, you know, just think about yourself. You're watching your screen, you know, and I'm talking on it. What is your experience like? Well, I mean, I can't assume that mine is exactly the same. I mean, I will, but you know, I shouldn't technically. But you know, I will assume that your experience is similar to mine, and that it seems like it culminates, right? There's a culmination of factors, a culmination of sensory input, a culmination of thoughts and perceptions and feelings into a conscious awareness, right? A consciousness, just an experience with qualia, you know, qualitative aspects to it that are very difficult to explain away or, you know, understand in purely materialistic terms. Like, we can understand that something emits a red wavelength, but like, what is the actual redness? You know, the actual redness of it, like the purely subjective aspect that seems to reside in no material area. It's just like an interaction. It's a weird interaction of material things to produce something that is seemingly unexplainable and immaterial in and of itself. So the parts are you know, produce something greater than, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? So I guess like my point is this. So in this scenario, we have a perception here. We have a perception here. We have two noticeable conscious experiences happening at the same time. Okay, but the thing about it is that where this point is drawn is really arbitrary, right? So like, sure, there's a cohesion and like in a timeline to my consciousness. You know, I feel as though I'm still Dustin from one second to the other. There's a culmination of sensory and experiential just happenings into a conscious experience, okay? And that conscious experience seems to culminate at a subject, like a single subject, a point, right? And I mean, it just experientially, it seems like it's between my eyes and somewhere in my head. But that point could be drawn anywhere, okay? Like, I could draw, you know, the point could be here at the tip of the marker. The point could be here. The point could be here. The point could be, you know, in the center of all of this, okay? The point could be, you know, in the center of this chair. The point could be, you know, between me and where you are sitting. My point is that it's something like to be everywhere, right? So like, and that's what I think the point of the panpsychism is. That like, that consciousness permeates all things and mind is of all things. Well, basically it's something like to be anywhere at any time, right? And there's no reason to not think this, because we have this very rich and deep conscious experience just from seemingly just from an interaction of material parts, and that's all that's ever happening, right? I mean, like, yeah, I'm not saying that, and there's a difference between sentience and consciousness. I'm not saying that a chair is sentient. I'm not saying the camera is sentient. I'm not, you know, but fundamentally, I mean, you know, we're meat bags with electricity, you know, bouncing around inside of a complex network, and that produces this experience, right? And so just a little bit of, you know, more food for thought. This moving around the point of view thing is important, I think, and the more you start to like delve into and think about things this way, the more interesting things get. Because the thing is and this is like probably the most important takeaway of all of this. You've probably heard the saying that every man is an island, right? Well, you know, what's supposed to be the point of that? The point is that, well, you can never know what someone else is thinking. You can't know what someone else is going through. You can't, you know, yada yada, blah blah blah. But on the flip side of that coin, I think that it says just as much about how much you have in common with someone else, right? And I mean, forget about a human being, but just imagine even an animal, or like anything realistically that's having a rich, deep, conscious experience, okay? Which I think I just hopefully demonstrated is, you know, a lot of things. Like, you know, you're sitting in a room with someone else. Like, there's no real reason to think that there's not an experience or like a vibe or, you know, of the room, of the group of people. Like, there's a hive mind, a collective intelligence, and probably a collective consciousness, right? So by moving this around and starting to think about like what your actual perspective is, like what actual material inputs and that you have at your disposal, you can really start to think, in a deeper way, I think, and like, so to tie it back to something that I think is important, a Spinozan way of thinking about God and just, existence in general is that the concept of God is perfection. Okay? And perfection, if you try to parse it out a little bit better, I mean, good, bad are subjective terms. What's good for one subject is not good for another, and oftentimes they're mutually exclusive, right? But like in the sense of perfection, like perfection is different than good. You can say kind of like as a colloquialism, oh, that was a perfect result, a good result for you, from your perspective, right? But like true perfection is having every attribute. Like, it's the whole story. It's the cheetah chases the gazelle. The gazelle, one gazelle gets away, and it's a whole circle of life. All of it happening at the same time. Not regardless of what subjects are there or not. And so truly, when you think about it from that perspective, like what is perfection? I mean, perfection, like the viewpoint of God would just be the center point of everything that is, right? So there is something to be like God. There's some subjective experience that it's like to be that center point of the universe where all of it culminates. Just in the same way that's something that it's like to be this guy or me, right? But the cool thing is that it's always something like it. There's always something like it, no matter where it is, right? And the coolest thing is that it's always a subjective experience. It's like, yeah, the consciousness can be completely different, okay, but it's still consciousness. So that's the important bit, I think. And that's I think a driving force behind empathy and just understanding and not living in a solipsistic way in which you think that you're the only actor or sentient existence. It's like, I think if you really parse it out this way, it can't really be that way. I mean, I think that the feeling of solipsism, like a feeling of intuition that I am, this is all that matters or whatever. It's like, it's kind of like tied to that islandness, like a remembrance that fundamentally, it's arbitrary where the point is drawn, like where the consciousness is happening, what it is. And just fundamentally speaking, we should probably treat one another better because we're all fundamentally the same thing. We're all fundamentally just having a conscious experience, and that's really it. So anyway, I think that's all I have for today. If you like the video, like it, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.